This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
Hey Nomad, this is Dylan, and I'll be coming at you from Thailand and Bali. But welcome to a series of blogs that have helped me along my journeys, along getting started and being a medical traveler. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dylan Callier, and this is another episode of the Blogger series as I am away traveling on my big milestone journey. So thank you so much for joining. And I'm going to be reading a story here by Kuhn, the traveling traveler. And I just love her. I love her titles because they are so intriguing. But Doomed from the Start, a traveler-recruiter relationship built on lies. And so I'm going to tell the story, but I also want everybody to realize that there's a lot of, you go in these Facebook groups, right? And you see ragging on a lot of recruiters. And so there's a lot of fear around this. And so I don't want this to incite fear. I just want all travelers to know kind of the seriousness of what it means to pick a good recruiter, to have a good recruiter, and to have somebody on your team, on your dream team, that is going to make your dreams become reality. So they are very important. The good ones are out there, and we want to make sure that we are supporting them. So if you have those, definitely give them a shout out. Definitely let people know about them. If you're just starting out, I don't want you to be scared of recruiters. There's an option through Nomadicare for you to get those recruiters. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to learn everything, that goes into finding a good recruiter, especially when you're new to this and you don't know what to expect. Nomadicare does all the hard work for you. So it's definitely a good option. But let's dive into this, and then I'll be adding my commentary along the way. So Doomed from the Start, a traveler-recruiter relationship built on lies. And here's the foreword. This is an account of an encounter that I had with a travel therapy recruiter when I was a new travel therapist. I am sharing this specific story because I think it has a variety of red flags to watch for when speaking with new agencies and new recruiters. I think this is a good reminder why it is so important to find a recruiter who is honest and has transparency. The events described below occurred around 7 years ago, and the details are as I remember them. The story. My second contract as a traveling speech therapist was at a skilled nursing facility in Dallas. Looking back over my years of contract work, this was my worst assignment. It has the worst as far as productivity expectations and managing a caseload were concerned. I was the only speech-language pathologist in the building and managing a caseload of 14 to 22 patients. Initially, I was told to be about 95% productive. Although no number was written in my contract, when on day 2 of the job, I said that 95% was not possible. My agency was contacted and told that my contract would be terminated if I was not immediately above 90%. Wow, productivity. That is pretty intense productivity. I do not work in SNF caseloads. I have not worked in a SNF since I was a clinical student, but typically 85% is pretty normal to see. Hardly ever goes down to 80% anymore. Not saying that there's not permanent jobs out there that allow for that, but 85%. And then 90% is also becoming normal. Anything at 95% or above, if you have the ability to be flexible, I've been told through SNF management, persons in that position, that you can absolutely try to pass on those, because as a traveler getting into the routine of things, it's very hard to maintain anything at 95%. To move on with the story, I learned a lot on that assignment. My days were busy. I rarely saw a patient outside of the gym because, frankly, I did not have time to walk down the hallway and to walk back. The cold call. On an especially busy day, I heard another therapist yell my name. She told me I had a phone call in the office. I told her to take a message because I was with a patient. She then handed me a piece of paper with a number on it. When I finally had a chance on my lunch break, I called the number. The caller turned out to be a male voice that I did not recognize. I am going to call this person Joe, although that was not his real name. Anyway, Joe started complimenting me on how he heard I was such a good traveler. He wanted to talk about finding me a new position when this one was over. So this is setting the stage for how she got into this very high productive and very hard place for Julia to work. And so this is, again, the first call by this gentleman, Joe. I was confused. Who is this guy calling me at work that seems to know my business? I was suspicious. And when he said he heard good things about me because my coworkers were not happy with my job performance. Yet it was good to hear a compliment for a change. And I asked him who he worked for. He said the name of his company, and it did not register with me. I later learned it was a traveling agency and he was a recruiter. I asked him if he had jobs in Dallas, and he said his company had many job openings in Dallas. Hearing these words, jobs in Dallas, rang a bell with me, so I gave him my phone number, and we talked later outside of work. The red flags begin. I do not know if recruiters still do this, but cold calling people at work was a popular thing when I started traveling. Recruiters from certain, not all agencies, would keep tabs on when a building hired travelers. If the traveler did not work for them, the agency would call around a month or so after the start date and ask to speak on the phone to the speech traveler or something similar. Here starts the problem. From the beginning, this relationship was built on lies. Joe had no idea what kind of therapist I was. He surely did not have jobs in Dallas. Nobody did at the time. I was a novice in the travel industry and knew that the building I was in was trying to cancel my contract. This pushed me forward to pursue phone calls with Joe. I knew switching companies would be a hassle, but I was ready to go with anybody who could get me another job in Dallas. I set up a file and a resume with the staffing agency and told Joe to call me if any jobs opened up in Dallas, which he was promising me there would be. He knew I was also working with my current agency to locate a job and accepted that he was in competition with another agency. More red flags. Not being told facility name prior to submitting. One day, Joe called about a job in an inpatient facility outside of Dallas. He said he could not give me the name of the facility and said that he did not know much about the assignment. He said it was a high pay rate. The rate wasn't any higher than what I was currently making, but he said that it was good. I thought it was odd that he could not tell me the name of the facility, but I was new to the travel therapy and did not know what to expect. When I got a call for a phone interview, I was surprised to hear that the facility was a residential school for children with severe developmental disabilities. It was over an hour and a half from Dallas. The woman I interviewed with was a fellow SLP who took time out of her day to speak with me. She told me the caseload would be very AAC heavy, and most of the visits would be integrating functional communication into daily routines. For some, this would be a dream job. For me, it could not have possibly been any further from my skill set or interests. I politely told the woman that it would not be appropriate for me to take a contract there. She understood, and I thanked her again for the time she spent with me. Moving on. Joe had heard from the client that I refused the job and was sharp with me when he called. I told them it was not a good fit and that I was going to continue to look for a job through his agency and the agency that I was currently working for. I knew that I could have saved my time and the SLP's time if Joe would have told me the name and the demographics of the facility. However, I was still learning the industry at the time and didn't know how things worked. Oddly enough, about an hour after I had that disappointing phone interview, I had the recruiter that I was currently working for call me with a job opportunity that was very high paying in Houston and matched my start date. The job in Houston sounded like a good match, so I went over the details and told him to submit me. I also told him about the interview that I did through the other agency and that I passed on the job. He understood. The facility in Houston was eager to sign on a traveler, and I interviewed and got the job within hours. I was working with my agency to write up the contract when I got a call from Joe. He was asking me about my plans, and I told him that I took a job in Houston. Joe put a guilt trip on me and said I betrayed him. He offered to match any pay that I was making from my agency to work with his agency. I was so confused. A week ago, he could not bring me above X dollars. Now, all of a sudden, he could pay me $200 more a week? I told Joe that I stand by my decision to stay with the agency I was with and that I am signing the contract with them. What happened next is a blur, but he called me a liar and told me that I was playing with him. We spat some words back and forth before agreeing to never talk again. We never did talk again, and I never worked for that agency. I've had many friends who had great recruiters through this specific agency and wonderful experiences. Yet I likely will never choose to work for this company because of my experience with one person. This relationship was bound to fail from the start. It was based on lies from the very beginning, calling me at work saying he heard about me, had jobs in Dallas, could pay better than any other agency, etc. He made all the promises in the world and could not fulfill them. When I got suspicious, he blamed things on me. I learned a lot during that assignment in Dallas. Among other things, I learned to trust my gut and ask the right questions to avoid negative situations. I stopped wasting time with recruiters who were sneaky. Instead, I found those who were not and have built a lot of good working relationships. Now I work with recruiters that will offer me a rate, and I do not question it. I know it is their best offer, not only because of the shopping around that I've done over the years and the price comparing, but because I trust them. And so that is definitely not the worst horror story I've heard about recruiters, but it was a very good story about a few different things. So there are situations, and you have to be careful if you're getting ready to start out with this, about handing out number and information and things like that. If you are currently permanently employed and you're not ready to tell them yet that you are going to be starting traveling soon, what a bummer of a way for that information to be delivered by a travel therapy company calling, either for your references or another travel therapy agency calling and asking for you, the travel therapist, and they're like, wait, no, she's a permanent person. Why are you talking to a travel agency? And then you're stuck in a tough spot. So that is one thing to be aware of, is be careful with the information that you give travel agencies. If the current company you're working with is not aware that you're preparing to move on, to move forward with your plans, then you want to be transparent with that before they get a call from another travel agency. And usually you can be very direct with that information with whoever that you're talking to, the recruiter, and that you won't have an issue as long as you're very direct and you communicate that to them as well. The phone calls, if you get a random phone call from a recruiter, usually it's somebody that's pretty new. And I've talked about this before, about you want to make sure that the person you're working with has 2 years experience. One, the recruiters coming out don't have the amount of knowledge about your specific field, because usually they don't go to school for health professions. They don't know much about nursing. They don't know what a normal nursing day looks like. They don't know the difference between ER and ICU. They don't know the difference between occupational and physical therapy. They don't know what lab techs do throughout their day. They don't know what speech therapists do throughout their day. And so it's hard for when they approach you with jobs, it might be something completely that you're not looking for. And so that can be difficult because you're going to have to work with them in order to know what you're looking for. Versus somebody who's been doing this for more than 2 years. They usually have a good idea of what a normal day looks like and what you would like as a traveler. Number 2, recruiter jobs is this high pressure sales job, and they might just not make it. The burnout rate for recruiters, we always talk about burnout within the health professions. Burnout is higher on the recruiter end. So most likely a newer person won't make it for a year. So you want somebody who's been doing it for 2 years. So if somebody calls you randomly, that's the first question to ask, because usually they have been just kind of given a call list, and it might be within the first couple of weeks that they're working. Guilt tripping is never okay. If you're dealing with somebody who is guilt tripping, or when you say, hey, I'm going to be working with more travel agencies, more than just one, and they even slightly guilt trip you, call them out on it. And say, I'm actually really worried. I'm actually really nervous because I know I am a very empathetic person. If I feel like I'm getting guilt tripped for something that is common within this industry, I don't think I want a relationship like that. So if it's a little guilt trip, you can usually nip it right at the beginning. If it's a big guilt trip and they're really kind of going into this like Julia experienced, I would not work with that person. You're totally within the right of working with multiple recruiters. And it's a competition. They're aware. They're aware they have to hustle. And if they don't hustle hard enough, and again, with this situation, all of a sudden now he's got more money to give, not being very transparent. And clearly she was working with somebody who wasn't wanting to give her the best opportunity. And so he then got defensive about his decisions and ended up having the verbal spat, as Julia put it, at the end. And so this was a really good story. Again, there are really good recruiters out there. And those are the ones you want to work with, the ones that are comfortable with you working with multiple people, because that is ultimately what you need to do to get the best jobs, to accomplish your goals with this whole travel game. And the recruiters that if you don't want to negotiate, you don't have to. They know that they need to give you the best from the start. You don't have to go through this back and forth. You don't have to. Sometimes when you're working with multiple recruiters, a lot of them end up having the same jobs, and they approach you with each, and you just say, you know what, whoever gives me the best opportunity financially, that's who I'll go with. And then you don't have to go through this nasty feeling like back and forth, like, oh, well, this recruiter said I could get this much. What do you got for me? Oh, okay. Now this recruiter is saying they actually went up 200. What can you get from me? And avoid that whole back and forth, because a lot of us don't enjoy doing that. And so there are good recruiters out there. If you don't know where to go, use Nomadicare. If, friends are a good way to find recruiters as well. But if they haven't been traveling very long, they just know they've made a good connection with that person. And connection is important. But if they're fairly new to the travel game, they might not know what to look for. They might not know that response time within 24 hours is what should be expected. Because if they're not responding now, when you're a prospective client, when you're actually in the contract, locked in, and something happens where you need to contact them, and all of a sudden you can't get a hold of them for another 48 hours, that's a big deal. And so things like that, not getting guilt tripped, them being okay with you working with multiple people, things to know, other red flags to look out for. So friends are a good way. It's a better way than just getting a random call. So the ranking goes, random calls and calling the facility would be the worst way to get, a recruiter that you're going to trust. The next way would be through a friend that hasn't had very much experience. The next would be through a friend that has more experience. And then the next way would be through somebody who's been around, somebody who actually vets their recruiters, like Nomadic or some of these social media persons that have been around for a while as well. So that is my tidbit, my commentary on this blog post. I think it was very good explanation of stuff that used to happen quite often. Not so much anymore because the industry is changing thanks to the influencers out there. But influencers like myself, influencers like the Traveling Traveler, influencing like Nomadic Hair, like PT Adventures, like Fit Travel Life, all these people tired of dealing with these salesy type of situations and making this industry go up, which is the ultimate goal. And so these used to happen a lot. Things are getting better. Stand up for yourself. Stand up for making this more transparent industry, making this more of a less of a negotiations for contracts. Soon as this industry evolves, you won't have to, but currently that you're still something that you're probably going to have to do, something that you're going to experience. But thank you so much, Julia, for writing this blog post. It's very, very well written. Again, this is thetravelingtraveler.com, and the great title of Doomed from the Start, a Traveler Recruiter Relationship Built on Lies. And thank you so much, guys. So if you have questions on Julia, for Julia or myself, you can go to New Medical Nomads Facebook group. If you're looking for the next official launch of the podcast, you can go to the New Medical Nomads podcast Facebook page. If you want the early access to these, you can also subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on iTunes or Spotify or any other podcast app that we're on. Usually wherever you're at, I'm at. And then thank you so much, guys, for the reviews on iTunes, the subscriptions, the follows, all the engagement, all the likes, the hearts when these things pop up on the screen, the comments down below. I love connecting with you guys. Please keep doing that. And reading the reviews makes my day. And so thank you so much, because the more engagement that we get, the more people will see it, the more people we can help, which is ultimately the goal of this podcast. So thanks again, guys. Thanks for following. All you nomads, you guys have safe travels.